This is very much about the perception that we've been able to build and the facts that we've been able to uncover during our work and our last decade of work across the sector. And we specialise in doing operational and performance improvements within the sector, so both in the manufacturers right through to the retailers themselves, saving tens of millions for many manufacturers and hundreds of millions in the grocery retail sector. And so for the time that we spent in the sector, we've been able to actually understand what's really going on some of the real challenges that exist. And what we can see is that the belief in the sector around what the discounters have done brilliantly and have stolen the march on the big four, the multiples in the sector, can actually be challenged. The beliefs that exist in the marketplace, from our point of view, and the facts we're able to build aren't right. And there's a real challenge there for the big four, for the multiples to fight back against the discounters. So I've got 10 minutes to go through and just give you an insight into why we believe that and some of the kind of the first line studies, the surveys we've been able to do to build on that picture. But also very lucky today to have Andy Clark with us, who's the former CEO of Asda, who'll be able to join us about halfway through and answer some of your questions and hopefully give a bit of insight on running one of the biggest businesses in the UK over many years. So no further ado, we'll get into some of the detail. Okay, so for people who work in the sector, it will be no surprise to see that the discounters have been very successful over recent years, and this is the market share for the big players. So Tesco's through to Iceland, and the blue is last year, the purple is this year. And what it looks like is that there's not been much change year on year, and you've got the big four with 70% of the market share, and Aldi and Lidl with only 12% of the market. So it doesn't look too bad for the big four. However, when you look at the change from year to year, in reality, we've still seen successive year-on-year growth of double digits from Aldi and Lidl, so absolutely stealing market share from the big four players. And it's a trend that's been going on for many years now. And I suppose the question is, when you've got 70% of the market and you've got a lot of power and a lot of influence and a lot of money, how come they've not been able to stop that consistent march of the discounters? So there's a lot in the marketplace around how amazing the discounters have done, and they have done an amazing job in many areas. So the price that they're able to offer, the quality that they're able to offer, the service that they've been able to bring at such a low cost. When you actually get below those opinions and look at the facts, it's not actually all true. But what is a very clear fact is the amount that they spend on marketing. So that number in the middle there, 500% increase in marketing budget in Lidl from 2012 to 2015, and they're now the biggest spenders on marketing in the sector. So they spend more, even though they're much, much smaller than the big players in the sector, they spend more on marketing. And it's not to say they don't do things very, very well, but what they have done is create amazing perception about what they are as a business and what they're able to offer customers. But it's not all bad news for the multiples. So of all the shoppers that shop in a discounter every week, 94% of them also shop in a multiple. So they've got every chance to steal that custom back and get those customers stopping going to the discounters to go and get what they perceive to be a great offer. So I made a couple of bold statements there, so I just want to take you through why we think that. But first of all, let's just have a look at some of those big ones, big drivers of why people think the discounters are winning. So first one up is price, and this is, I think, a pretty strongly held belief that the discounters have been able to offer things at a much lower cost and at that same quality range. And that's being played out at the moment. So Tesco's, for example, have pledged to match on price and quality with 60% of Aldi and Lidl's range recently. The reality is, if Tesco's went the full hog and matched the whole range on price, it would cost the average big four retailer in the UK £1 billion, and that would be a straight hit to the profit line. So clearly that's not a particularly appetising investment to make for any of the big four. Why we don't think actually that's the right thing specifically to do is because of the chart you can see on the right-hand side here. So although price is a differentiating factor for people, when surveyed, the average customer in the UK actually gives 3 bigger reasons why they shop in a particular supermarket. The first one being location, so basically if it's easy for me, I'm probably going to go there. Does it offer the range of products and services that I want? And third thing being, is it just habits and it's familiar to me, and therefore I like to shop in that particular supermarket. And it's only when you get to the fourth factor that actually becomes one of the drivers. So it's not to say that it's not important, but actually it's not the reason why people go to a particular supermarket, and it's not the biggest driver. So there's a reality there that's driving something else, driving shoppers into the discounters and driving that growth that needs to be challenged. So the second big one that is often talked about in terms of the success of the discounters is that they offer as good, if not better quality products. So what we thought we'd take this one on. So we've actually went and bought a load of products from the stores and took quite a large sample of people and did a load of blind taste testing. And what we found was that on the mid-tier products, the big four came out consistently above the Aldi and Lidl in terms of the perceived quality of that product. So in blind taste testing, not knowing where it's coming from, consistently came out above. And what was even more interesting, on the entry-level tiers, so on your value products, they also came out higher up in terms of in terms of actual quality when blind taste tested. So that really says, and there's actually quite a lot of studies out there. So if you do go and do a bit of research, and there's quite a few companies who do these independent blind taste testings, it's actually a pretty consistent picture. So why, when surveyed, do 90% of people who shop in discounters say that they believe the quality is at least as good, if not better, than what you get in the multiple? So how have they managed to achieve such a good perception about what's going on in terms of their quality? Okay, so how do the big four, how do the multiples fight back against the discounters? So we think there's actually 8 key steps they need to take. Unfortunately, there is a bit of cost there, so there definitely is an on-cost to go after fighting back and beating back the discounters. However, we actually can see from the work we've done, and we've spent well over 100 consultant years in the sector in the last 2 years, we can see a 4 billion opportunity to be delivered in the sector through operational improvements across the business, which can be got at within 12 to 24 months. So there's absolutely the opportunity to mitigate against some of those costs. Okay, so just to give you an overview of some of those steps. So we look at the first 3 steps. So 1, simplify product tiers. 2, offer comparable products to what is held in discounters. And the third one being get after some of those operational improvements and make some savings. So if I just briefly go through each one of those. So the first one about simplified product tiers. For people who work heavily in the industry, they'll be very clearly aware of the 3-tier approach. Back in 1993, Tesco brought in their value range, which was the new lower tier. And that really did work. It allowed the big four to offer a larger range, as well as offer a lower price product, which was perceived to be good quality, which allowed you to have a really grow your sales in the sector. So very successful setup of the ranging. What happened when the discounters came in was they absolutely destroyed the benefit of having a lower range. So because they were able to successfully say, we've got one range of products that competes on quality with at least the mid-tier, but also offer that at the price of the lower tier, it meant that what was the point in the lower tier in the big four? Yet that still exists in the big four, and our belief is that get rid of that lower tier and actually create one quality tier on the mid-level that you then price match against on quality and on price. And then you have a higher tier to allow you to give that kind of value opportunity for your customers. And what that means, though, is when you do create that one tier that's price comparable, you do still need to get that price down to within a few percentage points of what the discounts are offering. The reality of that against the 1,500 SKUs that products that a discounter will offer means that there is roughly a £260 million on cost for the average Big Four supermarket. So that's still quite a substantial investment to go after. However, as I mentioned, there's still a big opportunity in operational improvements. And this isn't about looking at how do we bring in a new technology. This isn't about how do we spend on capital expenditure to bring in a new kit in our supermarket. This is about today, as we see it, we have consistently seen that both in the supply chain in manufacturers and in the four walls of the retailers, that there's for every 100 million of turnover, there's roughly £2 to £4 million of deliverable opportunity that can be put into the bottom line without that expenditure. And for example, so we're working in a meat manufacturer at the moment who manufacture ham. And one of our consultants was able to go into a manufacturing facility and find £1 million of opportunity in ham yield by finding that the door on 2 of the ovens was loose and the temperature probe was therefore not working, which meant that they were overcooking the ham and under yield on the product. Those kind of opportunities exist throughout FMCG, throughout manufacturing. And then when you go into the retailers, there's opportunities when you can go in as a customer and see them. So the self-checkouts aren't being operated correctly. We aren't encouraging people to use them in the right way. We aren't fixing the problems as quickly as we can do. And all those underlying problems that aren't fixed operationally lead to significant bottom line financial impact on those businesses. As I say, we consistently see those kind of opportunities that can be delivered. So we move on to the next bit. So you've got your price proposition correct, you've got your range correct, but actually still, as we mentioned at the start, the cost isn't the biggest driver. So that isn't the reason overall why we're losing market share as the big four. So what they need now to go after is the marketing side. It's aligning expectations in the market. What do customers think? How do we change the way they think? So we need to align our marketing campaigns. We need to get out there and tell people that actually, in blind taste testing, our products are as good, if not better, than what's going on in the discounters. We need to promote the ease of shop. So, okay, it might be quite quick to rush around a discounter and buy the 10 items you want, but actually that's an extra trip you're having to make because we know that 94% of you who go into a discounter have got to make another trip back to one of the big multiples. Actually, if you go down to one trip and get everything you want in one of the big multiples, then you've saved yourself time. So it's a bit of a fallacy to say that it's actually quicker and easier to shop in a discounter. And the fact that actually every single UK postcode is within 6 minutes drive of a Tesco's means that the multiples have already won the war in terms of locations of stores. And that final one there, so how do we make sure actually when people come to the stores they have got an amazing service? And really interestingly, that in the top 3 reasons why people say that quality isn't good on fresh products in supermarkets is because it's not available. So although that doesn't feel like the right kind of measure about is something good quality, it's a reality of what people perceive. And from the 200 plus consultants we've got across the country, we're lucky enough to be able to put them into the supermarkets to do some first-hand studies. And what that's meant is that we've been able to see that across the average supermarket in the UK, there's between 25 and 60% of the time that a product you want to buy isn't on the shelf, it's actually out the back in the warehouse. And that's an operational issue that the supermarkets can fix. And we find that over 50% of those problems can be fixed through operational improvement. Okay, and so what are the last 2 steps? So we've got our aligned marketing, we've got our improved proposition, we've got our better range. We also need to go and actually get out there and tell the customers about it in a way that creates the same level of passion that the discounters have done an amazing job of. So through surveys that we've done on customer base, we've had people, quite a large percentage of people say that 80% of the time they believe that what they can get in a discounter is above their expectations. So they're buying products they're not expecting to be able to buy. Actually, you can get 20 times the number of products in an average multiple store than you can in a discount store. So that's just not true, actually, that they are offering a better range at all. And 30% of those people say they go home and brag to their friends and family about what they bought in the discounters. You just don't get that in the multiples at the moment. So there's a real challenge for those big 4 supermarkets to build that passion, because the reality is they offer a better range, they offer better service, they offer shorter queue lengths compared to discounters, but the customers don't believe that, the customers don't know that, and they're losing the war on the marketing side. Okay, so that's a quick overview of some of the insights we've got over the last few years in the supermarket industry. What I thought I'd do as well before I invite Andy to join us was just, as we're at the Internet Retailing Conference, I thought it'd be useful to talk about online grocery. I'll set up the conversation for that. Just in terms of the headlines, these numbers probably won't be a massive surprise, but the UK food industry will probably just go over 10 billion pounds of sales this year in food alone. And it's growing 10 times as fast as standard total food sales in the UK. So it's a huge market, growing very quickly, and it's really competitive. And what's really interesting is that half of people in the UK also shop at least part of their food sales online at the moment. So it's an absolute growing market, which the multiples need to understand and try to make sure that they're winning in that market as well. So that's enough from me for the minute. So if you wouldn't mind welcoming Andy Clark to the stage, who will join me to answer some of your questions. If you wouldn't mind just giving maybe a few minutes and just doing your perspective of what we've just talked about.
Yeah, afternoon. Feels like a fireside chat with this afternoon's session. I'll tell you one thing for certain. It's a nice time to be taking a break from being a chief exec after you see some of the statistics that have been shared. And there is no doubt that the industry is going through a significant piece of change. I mean, it doesn't matter what part of the retailing sector you represent. We're going through significant change. And, of course, this conference is about internet retailing and the impact that's having on the sector. But the reason why, when Paul asked me if I'd come and join him for a few minutes today, is that, what Paul's just explained really is the golden nugget that most businesses are struggling with, which is how do you take cost out faster than the investments that you need to make to be able to tackle the growing requirements of the customer for internet sales. And so I can talk very confidently that in a business that had internet sales of something close to £2 billion, that, and of course you may or may not have seen Tesco's results from yesterday, where Dave Lewis is doing a fabulous job actually of bringing the business back from some very difficult times. He's having to slow down the pace of change of his internet business because of the investment decisions that are required. So I think, that, of course, since 2008 and the growth of the discounters, that has been a lot of focus. Because for the four big grocers, and of course they're not only grocers, they've got big clothing and general merchandise businesses, that as they're trying to tackle the growth of discounters, and you can take a view of how big that's going to be. 5 years ago it was 5% of the market, now it's 10%, and if you took a view that it's going to be broadly in line with the rest of the European market, it's going to get to 15%. So there's 5% more market share erosion for principally the big grocers purely by discounting. And of course, as Paul explained, for any grocer, that's to try and get close to them on price, and it's only about price, it's £1 billion of investment. If you take the internet side of the business, which is growing, as again Paul said, at 10 times the pace of their core businesses, the investment to grow that is even greater. So whether it's a business like Walmart that you'll have seen bought or acquired Jet last year, that was principally to give them an advantage over their competitors. In this market, where for food Tesco have 50% of the grocery market online, he's slowing down the pace of that change and the pace of that acquisition of online food sales simply based on the cost of acquisition. But Paul, this is obviously meant to be a Q&A session rather than me grandstanding about what's happening in the market, so over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. So I've got some questions for Andy, sourced from a few colleagues and a few people in the industry, but also would like to actually just open up to the floor. Is there any initial questions or thoughts on any of the topics we've discussed or anything else? Is that mine? Yes.
Sure. I'm Richard Jenkins from M&S. In the last few years, in the supermarket sector, the main point of difference, the differentiation, has been around price, because much of the catalogue is the same, much of the customer proposition is the same. A race to the bottom ultimately ends in no winners. How can the supermarkets otherwise demarcate themselves from each other and grow a profitable business?
God, that's a very broad question. Are you talking about online or just generically across their overall proposition? I mean, range is the big question, isn't it? So, and in food, at this point, the discounters haven't addressed the online question. I'm sure it's on the top of their notepad, but they haven't addressed that. And that's simply because they've got enough growth today, and that's satisfying their ambitions without trying to tackle a costly investment into online. There's one thing for certain, that convenience is going to be the winner, whether that's convenience online or in physical space. And you have to take a view, and you'll create your own opinions about how big the online market's going to be for food. So if today it's about 7-8% of the overall grocery market. You could take a view then, be really ambitious and say it could get to 20%. 80% of sales are still going to be generated in physical stores. And of course, that will give huge change requirements for space and all those other difficult capital choices. But the businesses that will survive and flourish will be those that are able to differentiate in that 80%. Because, from what I've observed over the course of the last 20 years, and that's how long really food online has been going for, that it's how you differentiate the experience in the physical stores and then how you acquire at the lowest cost sales to online customers. So I think it's going to be, to do with that physical space that'll be the differentiator for those big four grocers. And I guess the big question will be, certainly amongst the non-pure plays, then and of course we've seen Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods, and it's small in this market, but it's huge in the US. Watching how they adapt that business and learn about food. And of course, the big question which is being speculated upon is who's next? Who are Amazon going to acquire next to give them scale in food in this market? And there's plenty of speculation about who that could be. However, differentiation through range and service experience in stores and the speed of acquisition online, I think, will be the differentiator. Not sure that answers your question. I think it's difficult to see whether. Thank you. There's a lady there in the third row.
I think my voice is loud enough. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Let me just give you the microphone.
You mentioned Next just now, actually.
You can't get away with it. Look, the microphone's coming.
Okay. You mentioned Next just now, actually. And during the retail sector, Marks and Spencer, being a clothes shop, used to worry about Next. Everything they did was, but Next is coming and they're going to be big. They still are worried about Next. What strategy have you got not to worry about the Aldi and Lidl of this world?
What strategy? Some of that last bit.
What strategy have you got not to be able to worry about them as heavy discounters?
Hey, I guess it's on the pad of all of the four big grocers' chief execs' desks. I think the M&S and Next analogy, well, M&S was so worried about it, they employed George Davis to create a range of clothing so they could learn from it. So, that's a piece of history, but frankly, I'm not sure it helped that much, to be honest, because it didn't necessarily recreate a strategy for Marks and Spencer's that, well, exactly, yeah. For the big grocers and Aldi and Lidl, I think the fact there are only two of them is, to some degree, an advantage. I was chief exec of Asda when we acquired Netto, and of course it was pre 2008 when the crash happened. The fact there's a duopoly in discounting is, at this point, an advantage. If it becomes broader than that, I think it'll be an even bigger challenge for the big grocers. But I think they'll reach a ceiling. So if you think, and some of you may or may not shop in the discounters, and those two in particular, but of course the discount market is broader than just those two. You've got another tier of discounting that happens, and you could argue is hard discounting, which is the B&M bargains, 99p stores, that population, which contribute towards the overall market share of the discounters. For the big grocers, then I think it's an inevitability that food margins are going to come under further pressure for the big grocers. And that's not something that hasn't been discussed in other forums. A lot of the analysts talk about the impact of food margins on overall profitability. I think we're going to see more of that. The way of differentiating will be how they can spread the risk across the rest of the proposition. So fashion is a richer margin than food. And you'll see that all the big grocers are actively growing their fashion and general merchandise business to try and spread the risk of food margin dilution. But I think that they're going to have to get closer. 20% price differential, frankly, is too wide a differential for the customer still not to choose for a proportion of their shopping an Aldi or a Lidl shopping experience. And frankly, I think, and it depends on the store experience of the individual store, but Lidl, I think, are a greater threat than Aldi. I think Lidl are a better, more rounded food retailer than arguably others that they compete against.
I think we've got another question here. Mark, if you could tell us who you are.
I can. Thank you, Andy, for the compliment. Alex from Lidl.
Timing's everything. Sneaked in at the back.
Yeah, Alex Murray from Lidl. And it's obviously very interesting looking at it from the other side, and you know the analysis obviously that we do, looking at the big four and what they do well, and learning what we can, which is a lot, I hasten to add. Do you think, in terms of just an interesting question about range, which you touched on, do you think that sort of range actually can be a negative as well as a positive? Because obviously as a business, it's no secret that the way that we achieve a lot of our prices is by narrowing the range and therefore buying very deep. And do you think you will see that rationalisation of range that Paul touched on in terms of eliminating some of the range in order to achieve those prices? Is that a necessary move that you think that the big four are going to have to consider?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, it's happening, isn't it? I mean, probably Tesco were the first to make the move with a 30% range cut 4 years ago. And, you know, I remember when Dave Lewis went in, he talked openly about how many different SKUs of ketchup do you really need in a range? And I think 27 was the number or something that was quoted. So, you know, range rationalisation is going to continue to happen. What's the right number is, of course, the question. You know, if a big grocer's got 20,000 SKUs and, you know, your business has got, I don't know, 3,000 SKUs, then, you know, there's a huge variance. And, of course, you know, somewhere between 3,000 and 20,000 will be the right number for a 40,000 square foot store. And, you know, the grocers will be working hard at that. The challenge is, yes, it's about simplification, but if it was a group of buyers sat in front of me, they'd think it was heresy that I was considering being more aggressive with them about reducing range, because, of course, their margin mix is everything. And if you're a group of suppliers, you'd equally be having that same sort of challenging discussion. I'm pretty sure that on the four CMOs, chief merchants of the four big grocers, they'll be actively looking at range rationalisation, but in a way that's still maintaining, you know, very strong, appropriate differentiation and choice for the customers that want to shop their stores. And as was said earlier on, I think Paul said it, that, you know, there's still a big proportion of the weekly shop happens in a big grocer versus the discounters. You know, big proportion of customers come to you, they want to do their basic shop, and then they'll go and top up elsewhere. And you won't like this particular piece of feedback, but you've got to believe that inevitability, for a customer, you want absolute simplicity. You want to go to one place for your primary shop and have that satisfied with the right quality and the right price. And at some point, saturation will be achieved. I don't think it's going to happen in the foreseeable future. In the next 5 years, I think you've got plenty of growth in your business and the Aldi business. But I think to your opening question, yes, I think range is going to continue to be rationalised, and it'll be somewhere between 3 and 20. But, you know, we'll watch with interest where it ends up.
Great. And I wonder whether I could actually just put a question to you. We've been talking a lot during the conference today about personalisation and customisation. And I remember talking to Clear Channel a couple of years ago about the panels which they have around a lot of the big retail stores now. And they were telling me that it's possible to actually read a lot of the customers who are coming in from their mobile phones, identify them, and present targeted messages to them, like, you know, if you've bought some bananas, here is an offer of bananas, etc. The reason they don't do that is they don't have the permission to do that. And there's obviously on the internet, there's a lot of ways in which you can personalise the message. Do you think that's something which is interesting to retailers? Is it on the horizon, or is it still a bit of sci-fi, really?
Oh, no, I think it's there now. So geofencing of stores is already on test. It's certainly in the US. Walmart have been testing it for some time. And of course, you have got to get that customer permission to access their smartphone when they're walking through the store. But, you know, whether it's facial recognition or whether it's geofencing and through a smartphone, personalisation is becoming, you know, ever more important. And that the purpose of, and, you know, behind the Jet acquisition was that piece of platform technology that gives the access, the smart ability to upsell, you know, to the shoppers either online or in a store. So, I mean, yes, more money is going to be invested in personalisation. You know, go back 20 years, and everybody thought Dunnhumby had something that was going to be revolutionary and was here forever through, you know, the club card. Well, the millions upon millions of pounds that was spent on developing that database, frankly, has become not completely irrelevant. And goodness, I'm sure the team would argue that it's not. But, you know, data is so easily accessible now through the social media vehicles that that personalisation will happen in a much smarter, much more cost-efficient way than was created all those years ago with loyalty programs through cards. It's just going to be something that everybody's going to have to adapt to and get used to.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Well,
Cool.
we're out of time, I'm afraid, so we have to wrap up. But I'd like to thank both of our speakers. It's been really informative. Thank you very much.